What if everything you've been told about falling rent prices is actually a trap? Millions of renters are celebrating temporary price dips right now. But the real story, the one hidden in plain sight, is far darker. Your rent is quietly preparing for its next big climb, and most people won't see it coming until it's too late. Stay with us for the next few minutes, because what you're about to hear could change every financial decision you make about housing in 2026. And if you find this information valuable, please subscribe to this channel right now so you never miss critical financial news that could save or cost you thousands of dollars every single year. Let's start with what the headlines are actually telling you. In November 2025, the national median asking rent across the 50 largest U.S. metro areas was $1,693, marking the 28th consecutive month of year-over-year rent declines, according to Realtor.com data. That sounds like great news for renters, and on the surface, it is. But there is a massive difference between rent declining temporarily and rent being permanently affordable. What we are seeing right now is the tail end of a construction boom, not a fundamental shift in the market structure. The moment that construction wave dries up, and it already is, everything flips. Here is why. Between 2022 and 2024, developers completed an enormous wave of new apartment buildings. In 2024 alone, more than 600,000 new multifamily apartment units were completed nationwide, the highest single-year total since the 1980s, according to Apartment List. That flood of supply temporarily pushed landlords into price wars. Vacancy rates climbed, landlords offered free months of rent, and renters had rare negotiating power. But that wave has already crashed on the shore. What comes next is the dry beach, and dry beaches don't last long. Multifamily housing starts have dropped by more than 40% between 2023 and 2025, according to the National Apartment Association, and are expected to remain weak. Rising costs of materials, persistently high interest rates, and builder concern about oversupply in certain markets have all slammed the brakes on new construction. The National Association of Home Builders projects that multifamily starts will fall another 5% in 2026, down to roughly 392,000 units annually. Compare that to the 547,000 multifamily units started in 2022 at the peak of the boom. The pipeline is draining fast, and when it empties, rent prices will have nowhere to go but up. The deeper truth is this: America has never actually solved its housing shortage problem. The supply wave of 2022 to 2024 was a band-aid on a wound that has been bleeding for over a decade. According to Realtor.com's 2026 Housing Supply Gap Report, released in early March 2026, the U.S. housing supply gap has now widened to an estimated 4.03 million homes, up from 3.8 million in 2024. That number is staggering. It means the country is short over 4 million homes right now, today, as you read this, and that gap is not shrinking fast enough. Even under the most optimistic possible construction scenario, where home building increases by 50% above the 2025 pace and all pent-up demand fully disappears. Realtor.com single quotes as chief economist Danielle Hale estimates it would still take roughly 7 years to close the deficit. 7 years. That means even if America started building like crazy tomorrow, renters would not feel meaningful relief until the early 2030s at the earliest. By then, your rent will have climbed significantly higher than where it stands today. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce puts the housing shortage at over 4.7 million homes, a deficit rooted in a decade of underbuilding that followed the Great Recession and then collided head-on with surging demand from millions of millennials entering their prime home-buying years. These millennials didn't buy homes at the rate previous generations did, largely because they couldn't afford to. So instead of buying, they kept renting, and their continued presence in the rental market has kept demand persistently elevated. Meanwhile, the average United States home value stands at $357,445 as of January 2026, up nearly 33% over just 5 years. Now let's talk about the mortgage trap, because this is one of the most important structural forces keeping rent high, and almost nobody explains it clearly. Millions of existing homeowners locked in mortgage rates of 3% or lower during 2020 and 2021. Today, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate sits around 6.2%. If those homeowners sell their current house and buy a new one, their monthly mortgage payment could nearly double, even on the same priced property. So what do? They don't move, they stay put. And by staying put, they remove homes from the for-sale inventory, which keeps both home prices and rents elevated. This phenomenon is widely known as the mortgage rate lock-in effect, and it is one of the most powerful forces holding the housing market in a stranglehold right now. To put numbers to that lock-in effect, according to Redfin's February 2026 analysis, buyers still need to earn $111,252 annually to afford the typical American home, compared to just $76,020 for the average renter. That's a 46% income gap between renting and owning. Until that gap closes significantly, millions of Americans will have no choice but to keep renting. And the more people who are forced to rent, the more landlords can justify raising rents. Supply stays constrained, demand stays high, prices go up. It's a cycle that feeds itself. Let's talk about the generation that is most trapped in this cycle. According to a March 2026 report, there were 1.82 million millennial and Gen Z households that were considered missing in 2025, meaning young adults who would normally be living independently are instead still living with parents or roommates because they simply cannot afford to rent or buy on their own. This is the highest count of missing young households in 4 years. And these are not people who don't want housing. They are people who desperately want it but are priced out. The moment economic conditions shift even slightly in their favor, all that pent-up demand will flood back into the rental market, driving prices higher almost overnight. A recent survey confirms how hard housing costs are hitting young people specifically. About 67% of Gen Z adults report struggling to cover their housing costs, compared to 53% of millennials and 36% of baby boomers. This isn't a minor inconvenience, this is a generation-defining financial crisis. Young adults are delaying marriage, delaying children, delaying careers, all because rent consumes so much of their income. And yet, with nowhere else to go, they keep paying. Landlords know this, the rental market knows this, and that knowledge gets baked into every lease renewal. There's another force accelerating this crisis that most renters are not even aware of: tariffs on construction materials. The Trump administration's tariffs on lumber, copper, cabinets, and steel have added significant costs to home building. According to a Center for American Progress analysis, tariff-induced higher building costs will lead to approximately 450,000 fewer homes being built over the next 5 years. At current construction rates, additional tariffs add roughly $17,500 in costs per new home. Every home that does not get built because of these tariffs is one less unit of supply competing for renters. Fewer competing units means landlords face less pressure to keep prices competitive. The result is higher rents across the board, passed directly to the families who can least afford them. Construction costs were already brutally high before tariffs entered the picture. Labor shortages in the skilled trades, rising wages, permit delays, restrictive zoning laws, and scarcity of buildable lots all combined to create what one NAHB economist summarized as the 5 L's of housing supply constraints: labor, lots, laws, lending, and lumber. The National Association of Home Builders reports that residential building material prices have been growing above 3% since June 2025, even as new construction demand has been weak. When it costs more to build every single unit, builders pass those costs to buyers, who pass them to renters when they don't buy and stay in the rental pool. Here's the cold, hard math that defines your rental future. Shelter costs are currently running at a 3.6% annual rate, outpacing broader consumer price inflation. The NAHB estimates that the nationwide housing shortage stands at roughly 1.2 million units on the conservative end, though other estimates reach as high as 4.7 million. Even the most conservative scenario demands years of elevated construction before renters get real, lasting relief. Meanwhile, between 2001 and 2024, renter incomes rose by just 9% in real terms, while rents rose by 30%, according to the Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies. That gap between income growth and rent growth is the core wound that America's housing market cannot seem to heal. What about the markets where rent has been falling? Isn't that proof that things are improving? Let's set the record straight. The sharpest rent declines in 2025 and early 2026 have appeared primarily in Sunbelt cities like Austin, Texas, which experienced a supercharged construction wave that dramatically oversupplied the local market. Austin has been posting negative rent growth for over 2 years straight. But that story is unique to oversupplied markets. Most of the country, particularly the Northeast and Midwest, never received that construction wave. In cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, the supply shortage was already severe and has only worsened. These are exactly the kinds of markets where rent hikes are steepest and most permanent. Redfin's chief economist Daryl Fairweather noted that fewer housing projects are being started and fewer are being completed, confirming that the pandemic building boom is now over. She added that limited inventory of both homes for sale and rent will only make the housing shortage worse going forward. According to Redfin's 2026 forecast, apartment rents are expected to rise 2% to 3% year-over-year by the end of 2026, roughly matching the pace of inflation. But here is the key point. 2% to 3% growth on top of rents that are already at historic highs is not relief. It is a continuation of the crisis under a different name. The Harvard Joint Center for Housing Studies recently noted that rising costs and weak rent growth have made new construction increasingly difficult, and that the high cost of homeownership has caused record renter household growth. In the second quarter of 2025, there was a record high annual increase of 784,000 apartment households. Think about that. Nearly 800,000 more households became renters in a single year, flooding a system that was already short millions of units. That is not a market moving toward equilibrium. That is a market moving rapidly in the wrong direction for anyone who rents. The insurance crisis is also quietly adding to the rental cost spiral. Rising insurance premiums, driven largely by climate-related disasters in the South and West, are crushing landlords' operating budgets in states like Florida, Texas, and California. When a landlord's insurance bill triples, those costs do not disappear. They get transferred directly into the rent. In states with the highest climate exposure, insurance costs alone have added hundreds of dollars annually to what landlords must charge to stay solvent. Renters in these markets are essentially paying a climate tax on top of everything else, and it is only going to grow as extreme weather events become more frequent and more expensive to insure against. So what does the full picture look like when you zoom out? The pandemic-era building boom gave renters a temporary breather, roughly from 2023 through early 2026, but that window is closing. The new supply pipeline is shrinking fast. Mortgage rates are keeping millions of would-be buyers trapped in the rental market. Over 4 million homes of missing supply will take at least 7 years to build back, even under optimistic assumptions. Tariffs are adding thousands of dollars to the cost of every new home. Young households are being financially crushed and delaying independent living, which creates a massive wave of pent-up rental demand. And institutional landlords, with growing portfolios of single-family rentals, have no financial incentive to reduce rents when demand exceeds supply. This is not pessimism, this is math. The structure of the American housing market in 2026 is designed, whether intentionally or not, to ensure that rents never meaningfully return to pre-pandemic levels. The baseline has been permanently reset. From 2001 to 2024, rents rose 30% in real terms. From 2020 to 2026, average home values rose 33%. These are not blips, these are new floors. And the forces keeping those floors elevated: shortage, high mortgage rates, construction headwinds, demographic demand, and policy gridlock are not going away anytime soon. What can renters do with this information? First and most urgently, do not assume the current softness in rents will last. If you are in a market where prices have dipped or landlords are offering concessions, this is your window to lock in a longer lease at today's rates before the supply wave fully drains away. Second, start building an emergency housing fund now. When your lease renews in a tighter market, you want financial flexibility to negotiate, move, or absorb a price hike without it derailing your entire budget. Third, push for policy change loudly and publicly. The only long-term solution to high rent is more supply. which requires zoning reform, faster permitting, more construction labor, and reduced material costs. Those are political decisions, and renters are voters too. Now we want to hear from you. Has your rent gone up this year, or have you managed to hold it steady or even get a reduction? Are you planning to lock in a longer lease term while prices are soft, or are you betting they will fall further? Do you think government policy can realistically solve the housing shortage in the next 5 years? Drop your answers and your housing situation in the comments below, because your experience matters and this community learns from each other. And if this story opened your eyes to forces in the housing market that most people never discuss, please subscribe to this channel right now. Share this video with anyone you know who is renting or thinking about renting, because the difference between knowing this information and not knowing it could be worth thousands of dollars in financial decisions over the next few years. Your subscription helps us keep producing the in-depth financial research you need to stay ahead.